Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of Nelson's Corner with your host, Mr. Nelson LeKay. Hey, Nelson.
Hey.
How's it going tonight?
All right.
Yeah, well, that's good. Also joining us, our student for this program, Mr. Zach Parrish.
Hey, everyone.
Are you doing any better than Nelson is tonight, Zach?
Man, I'm doing great.
Awesome. And
If that's better than Nelson, then yes. But see, the way he expresses himself, that could have been the equivalent of me feeling great.
This is very true.
It's kind of a mellow dude.
And your referee, Jason Busby, that's me.
You need a whistle.
Yeah, I do. Last night I really did.
You need a whistle. I'm telling you, it'd be awesome.
So this is the second part of the Introduction to Design Patterns series that we're doing in Nelson's Corner. And yesterday, with episode 6, we did a fundamental review, basically, taking a look at classes, different types with abstract classes, etc. We talked
Actually,
about...
Jason's being really nice. What they were doing is making sure that I wasn't paddling too far behind the boat when they started discussing design patterns.
Well, these are actually very important concepts.
And some good stuff came out of it. Stuff that, because really a lot of the really basic stuff I had been introduced to, but the refresher was nice.
Well, you give them a quick recap. What did we cover in yesterday's video?
Well, we started off just discussing the really basics of classes and state versus behavior. And we didn't even really have to go that far into that. We discussed interfaces. Now, that's something that I'd heard the term of, but I really needed some more exposure to. Okay. And so that helped a lot. We talked about inheritance, and it was really interesting getting to listen to Nelson's insights on inheritance, because I got into object-oriented programming a lot, mostly from your lectures. And you talk up how cool inheritance is, and it was really interesting to hear Nelson come back and say, I just never use inheritance. And to put it in that sense, and then to actually make it make sense as to why you might not want to use inheritance. It was actually very, very interesting. We talked about the single responsibility principle, data transmission objects, which are essentially just dummy objects that carry around state. We talked about decoupling, which is taking a class and making sure that your classes are not interdependent on one another. They can interact with each other. That's the whole idea. But if you get rid of one, others should not suddenly cease to work entirely. They shouldn't have functionality that crosses over between each other. Let's see, we talked about composition, and I still had to go back and forth a little bit to make sure that I understood exactly what composition was, but it ended up, the definition that I think came out of the whole thing was that it's the fields and properties that require instances of complex classes, as opposed to just being, regular fields.
So making a final object that's composed of sub-objects, objects that end up making up the complex object.
Exactly. We talked a little bit about polymorphism, which, I'd been exposed to that one, but again, the refresher was kind of nice. And then we discussed virtual methods, which is a method that can be overridden.
Which all plays part into the term polymorphism.
Right. And that overriding is optional. You don't have to override that. We talked about abstract classes, which cannot be instantiated. They have to be extended if they're to be utilized. And they have no... let's say they have a signature that's defined, and you have to follow that signature if you plan to extend it.
Well...
Is that right or is that wrong?
Well, no, yeah, it's not a signature. It's just if you have a class and then you extend an abstract class and then you have abstract methods within that class,
right.
You've got to provide, you absolutely must provide a implementation.
Which comes back to the next note I had, which was over abstract methods, which is just a method that it can only be in an abstract class, and if a developer extends an abstract class, that abstract method must be implemented.
Yes.
And that's the nuts and bolts of everything we covered. It just took a lot longer to cover it in last night's video.
Nelson, are you happy with Zach's summary of yesterday?
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Well, there you go, Zach. You get a B+.
Oh, that's the best I can hope for right now.
All right, Nelson. Well, let me just hand it over to you.
Okay, so the first pattern we're gonna talk about is something that you probably have heard of already or heard mentioned, and that's the MVC pattern. And the reason I want to talk about that is because it's more of a way to... It goes hand in hand with SRP, is essentially what I mean by that, and it gives you a way to organize your code and organize, 3 different... I'm not going to call them tiers, but 3 different sections of your code, depending on what role they play and what responsibility they fill. So have you heard the term MVC before, Zach?
Only from listening to you say it. I might have heard it idly, but I've never really associated a meaning to it. You can start by telling me what MVC means.
MVC stands for Model View Controller.
Okay. Then that actually does ring a bell. I think we might have spoken about it in a previous video.
Okay. Well, MVC, Well, again, like I said, it goes hand in hand with SRP. But the idea is that all of your classes in your project are either a model, a view, or a controller. Or every piece of code, I should say, because views might not necessarily be classes. They might be, I don't know, like template files for an HTML render or something. And I do want to say right now, though, that MVC itself isn't generally a pure MVC pattern is rarely applied to stateful applications such as games and Windows applications. There are actually variants of MVC like Model View Presenter or Model View View Model, and those are more commonly used in stateful applications. But in stateless applications like web development, MVC is MVC in its pure form is incredibly popular. But generally speaking, if you're following SRP, you can generally put any class that you write in one of these three categories. If it's a model, a view, or a controller, just to give you a general idea and just some general rules to follow when trying to make sure that your classes only perform one set of responsibilities, or one responsibility, I should say.
Okay.
So the three types of the model. I guess I have to define these now.
It would help.
A model class is a class that performs logic.
Now, just real quick, only because you mentioned it a second ago, you started off by saying that all classes would be either models or views or controllers. And then you retracted that to say that all pieces of code. So is it accurate to actually define it as a model class, or are you just defining a model and any piece of code could potentially be a model?
Well, you really only have...
I'm just making sure I understand, that's all.
If you want to get into the terminology, sometimes model is referring to the entire layer or entire tier, entire thing, the entire cloud of all of the code that's responsible for your model.
Okay.
Other time you might make models inside of models. Other times your view is representative of your entire view. Other times when we say view, it might be one view. And again, a view doesn't necessarily have to be an object or a class. It could be, like I said, it could be an HTML template file. Just as a model doesn't necessarily have to be a class either. It could be a database mapping file, even if it's what.
I was going to say, in terms of just keeping track of terminology and what we're approaching, should I jot this down as a model class with a definition, or just a model with a definition for that?
I think for the purpose of this, we should just do model class because we're not.
That's cool.
Representing anything outside of that, but I just want to say that the terminology is really fuzzy.
I understand.
If you go to a purist, the pure MVC doesn't apply to everything, but in a general sense, it does, and it's useful to think of it like that, especially when you're starting out with trying to make your classes only fulfill one responsibility. So,
okay.
Yeah. So the model, the model or a model, depending on which context I'm speaking in, is either a class or a group of, I'm just going to say a class, is a class that represents logic in your application. And what I mean by logic isn't behavior. I just mean logic as in it does stuff.
Okay.
That's pretty much the most specific definition I can come up with, because essentially all a model is it something that isn't either a viewer or a controller. It's the stuff in your code that performs operations. An example in a web application is you might have a model class that handles pulling users out of a database, and it's important to know that the model is generally going to be a huge object graph. You're generally going to have patterns within your model. Like you might have, in my example, you might have a user service, and that user service talks to a user repository, which talks to an ORM, which gets a user entity. So by just saying it's a model doesn't mean that it's not anything else, is what I'm trying to say. And it's generally not useful. It's generally not useful to call classes models.
Okay.
Just because it's so general. Like you'll see me name classes like something facade or something service or something repository, but you'll never see me say something like something model
Okay.
because it's such a general term.
Right. All right. I think I understand where you're getting at there, but it's almost like I'm probably gonna end up having to have some sort of compare
Right.
and contrast example. So I mean, if we end up having to move forward to view and or controller first, and then come back to showing how they differ from one another, then
Yeah.
that's fine.
Okay. So a view. Actually, I should do controller next. A controller is a class, and the controller is really the like I said, there's many MVC variants.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thing about the MVC variants is they all have models and they all have views, but not all of them have controllers.
Okay.
Like the MVP pattern is the model view presenter pattern, or the MVVM pattern is the model view view model pattern. So a controller, it doesn't always exist, but generally speaking, in the MVP pattern, the controller would be the presenter, just in a general sense, and in the MVVM pattern, the controller would be a mix between the view model and whatever binding you're using.
So in those variants, it's just kind of like a very specific way to designate something that generally already is a controller.
Yes, in the context of a general MVC implementation.
Yeah. Right.
But like I said, it depends on who you're talking to. It depends on what problem you're trying to solve, as far as how you think about the terminology. So the controller is the code that is responsible for taking the will of the user and converting it into method calls or object instantiations or whatever of the model. So it's responsible for digesting what the user wants and making it happen by telling the model what to do.
Okay.
Its second sort of, I guess I could say, responsibility, which is kind of bad to say, but it's really true in a lot of cases. The controller will also interact with the view, and I'll define what the view is, and I'll define how the controller interacts with it.
Mm-hmm.
So are you good with the controller for now?
So far, I mean, well, literally what I jotted down, because I'm taking notes along with everything you say, because I do read back over these notes in between videos just to make sure that everything makes sense, so that I know what questions to come at you with in the next video. But I've got that it's a class that takes the will of the user and converts it into action and controls what the model is doing. But again, it kind of comes back to how we define the model class, where right now that's just words.
Right. Okay.
And I understand that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And then later, I mean, once you start actually coding out an example, hopefully all of that will ring clear. But if what I just read to you seems to fit the bill, and then you're confident that later on when we start coding out an example, I'll see how that applies, then yeah, we're good with the controller class.
Okay. Then the last one would be the view.
Mm-hmm.
A view is, well, it's a view. It's presenting stuff to the user.
Okay.
And I do want to, so the controller will interact with the model, and then in most MVC implementations, the controller will also grab data that the view will need and pass that data to the view. The view will then present it to the user.
Okay.
And then, like I said, most commonly this is used, more pure MVC is used in web development. So you can imagine how it being stateless. By stateless, I mean when an HTTP request comes in, all of your objects have to be reinstantiated. You have to redo everything. There's no state that you can rely on already existing.
Yeah.
And the web being stateless really facilitates the pure MVC pattern, which is why the variants were created for more stateful applications.
Okay.
So we already actually have a bit of a controller here. Our main method is kind of like a controller. Now, it's not a controller class, but it kind of fills that role. So I'm actually going to break it out into, I'm going to create three classes here, but it's important to know that there generally is a relationship between the models and the views and the controllers of your app, but there doesn't have to be. You can create as many views as you want for a model, and as many controllers as you need for a model, and so on. So just because I'm going to create three classes doesn't mean for every controller you need a model, because that's not true. So let's do, I don't know, people store.
So, I mean, if you're coding using like pure MVC, I mean, do you still have to have a model then, or is that just like is it a guideline?
Every application that you write should have a model.
Okay.
Not even if it's not MVC, it needs a model.
Okay.
Because otherwise, your application doesn't.
Then I misunderstood what you said a second ago.
Let me say this, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The way I've always understood MVC from working with MVC in iPhone apps, which is and iPad apps, is very, very, very common. Your model's going to hold all of your data, your state, your application logic. That's the model. Model knows nothing about a controller, knows nothing about a view, though it does know how to make notifications to a view. But so the model's just holding. That's why when Nelson said every application is going to have a model.
Yeah.
Well, every application is going to have logic, application logic. It's going to have data.
Right.
And you're going to have that.
I mean, are you saying that the model it doesn't know how to utilize that data? It's just a storage device?
It's just it knows how to, retrieve data, save data, change state, but it's not about what you see in regards to that data.
Yeah.
It knows how to do calculations on that data.
Sure.
The view is what you see as the user when you're looking at this application. The view just simply presents the model to you.
Which leads us to the
controller,
which is kind of like a brain go between the two.
Yeah, think about it. You're working with this application. Your controller logic, or your controller, can take input from you and pass that off, figure out how that input needs to affect the model, and hand that off to the model so that the model can now make changes with its application logic to the data it's holding, which then can tell the view, update your view to display my model data properly.
Okay.
So you see how they all tie together?
Yeah, I think so. I would start drawing pictures at this point, generally.
So because of the relationship, as Nelson's still typing, between view and model, since view has to show information to you, it can ask the model for data to show.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to everything go through the controller.
Right.
The view can simply say, well, we know in this table we're going to show a list of all of our customers. So we can ask the model for the
send
data
that to the view
to show. That's right.
Yeah. Right. So the controller's not necessarily your bottleneck. It's not like everything has to pass through there.
That's correct.
I mean, I don't want to use words that I shouldn't, but it's kind of like an input manager, where it's going to deal with everything the user's telling the application to do, and then route commands accordingly.
Yeah. It can get a little more complex or even a little more abstract than that.
Can't everything.
What I'm trying to just settle everything into concrete, basic examples for you to help you kind of understand.
No, that's great. That's great. I mean, I can always branch out from there.
Hold on.
At least we have Nelson's keyboard to kind of fill in the space.
Yeah, we do.
It's better than nothing.
All right. I'm actually going to make this a little bit better. I'm going to use interfaces. But are you following along, or? So,
With the first part, I was actually still continuing to take down notes and trying to glean as much information I could out of Jason's example. I picked up as you were wrapping up some of the code for your earlier view.
okay.
But I mean, I think I see the gist of what you're doing. You're just trying to set up a really blatant example.
But did what Jason make sense at all?
What both of you said makes sense. Jason's example was a little bit easier to grasp on the fundamental level of what these guys were doing, but I see what you were saying as well. I think Jason just found a way to say it in a few less words.
What's Xbox Media Center? You familiar with it?
I've used it.
You can add movies into it. You can play movies back, stop, fast forward, delete, search, etc.
Yeah.
Well, let's break it down for me. So if we were to break that down into an MVC pattern and just give it a shot.
Sure. Well, it's going to need some sort of system to handle the storage of whatever information you have.
Okay, so we got a whole bunch. So we got some sort
database.
Yeah, very good. So we've got all the movies that are cataloged and referenced. So
and
that's
based on what you guys were saying. If the model isn't just a storage device, it can perform operations as well.
oh, absolutely.
So it's not because in the first time you hear about this, at least from my perspective, is you hear that there's a model which is a storage device, and then you kind of, at least halfway in your head, expect the controller to be the one that reaches in and works with that data, but that doesn't seem to necessarily be the case.
Right. I think, and I'm glad you're saying these things and kind of talking out loud, because this is how somebody else who's new to design patterns
Might see it. Yeah.
But seeing how what we gave you a second ago, saying that all of our application logic is going to reside inside the model. Now we're saying application logic.
Right.
So, and think of the application as a whole here as its primary focus. It's a media center.
Yeah. It's just there to call up a certain file type and.
So what would be our
display it,
application
render it.
logic? Just right off.
I'm sorry. Say again.
What would be our application logic? The heart of the Xbox Media Center. Playing a movie.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we were thinking of logic in the same way. I mean, functionality. Functionality would just be playing a movie or
the application functionality for. I'm getting a little bit more concrete here because there's logic obviously everywhere.
I mean, it seems like it would come down to simply as your basics: play, stop, next, rewind, fast forward, play slow, next frame.
Yeah,
I could go on and on.
Application logic that deals with that data.
Right.
Okay. Good.
Now, your view is just going to have to be whatever code has been presented to supply a user interface, as well as probably, I'm guessing, whatever engine would be required for viewing video files.
Don't even. Let's not get complicated with saying.
I'm not trying to.
I know. I'm just saying. Let's keep it real simple.
But I mean, well, the reason I bring that up is because that seems like it'd be a totally separate aspect of that kind of a program. You've got your user interface, sure, but then how in the world are you going to get a video file to display? So that's going to have to be handled as well, even if it's through some other library or something that you bring in.
So let's just say that the view is going to be all the code that's responsible for displaying.
Sure.
Data.
Not only the application, but whatever it is you're calling up.
Yeah. So it's going to display your data back to you. Where's the data at?
I don't even want to say it's stored within the model.
I do. I want you to say
is it okay?
Yeah,
Because all right. Well, the way I pictured in my head when. I don't picture the data being like the movies and songs and pictures that I'm looking at as being stored in the program. I can stick those in any folder on my computer and just reference. So, I mean, in that case, isn't the model really just holding a storage of references pointing to files?
But if that's the case, it's still holding data.
It is. But that's, I mean, I'm just trying to separate it because, like I said, in my head, it's not necessarily storing.
So, as you said at the beginning, there's going to be a database.
Yeah.
That we've got all of our movies in.
That database should have a list of locations on your hard drive to access all of this stuff.
Right.
So yeah, that would be a great big list of stuff.
The model needs to know how to pull
find all that stuff
all
and
of
then
those
what
movies.
it can do to pull it.
Yeah, it handles that. It has the logic. So it pulls all of those movies, TV shows, songs, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's holding it right there inside the model.
Yeah.
Now the view can ask it, or the model can tell the view, either way. This is the data you need to display.
Sure.
So let's say the view's just going to simply say, hey, I need this data to show right now in this list that I'm presenting?
Well, that comes back to an interesting question. I mean, so the controller, we've already established earlier on, is taking in inputs. So, I mean, that's really just a stack of code saying, I mean, okay, so if we're using Xbox Media Center, let's say we're controlling a whole thing through an Xbox controller for some reason. So, I mean, as I hit, like, the down arrow key, I'm scrolling down a list. If I hit the A key, suddenly I should be calling up whatever it was I had selected. And the controller...
And if you stop right there, that's an awesome example. Because your controller knows you hit the A key.
Right.
Now, hang on. It needs to figure out what the A key means.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, I'm just adding this in.
Yeah.
Because I haven't talked
Okay,
controller
sure.
in this example. So it needs to figure out what the A key means. So let's say in the particular state of the model, meaning that right now you have found the movie, you're on that screen, and if you press A, now it means to play.
Now, this comes back to something Nelson had mentioned earlier, that the MVC pattern was good for stateless applications. Does this mean you can't have state, or that you can, or is that kind of one of those fuzzy, awesome programming areas?
I'm simply going to say it can hold state if you need it to have state.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah, because in the application I'm describing here, you're in a particular, the model's in a particular state where you've now brought up a movie and you're waiting to play it. And the view is over here displaying this movie out on a screen, and telling you to hit the A button if you want to play.
Right, and then the controller, okay, so I do hit the A button. The controller reads through its list of commands and says, oh, he hit the A button. That means, and he has this object selected.
Yeah, but you see the cool thing?
Which means we've got to tell the model to call this up, and the model talks to the view and brings it up on the screen.
Here's the cool thing. The view doesn't know squat about the controller. It doesn't have to. You press the A button, so the controller handles all that. It goes, oh, Zach just pressed the A button. Let's see what we need to do with the A button. Well, at the moment, the model is in a state where we're about to play this movie. So I'm going to tell the model to play this movie.
Yeah.
Because the model contains the application logic.
It's funny. It's like your tower, your keyboard, and your monitor.
I love it. I haven't heard it put that way, but yeah.
I mean, and it's really generic. I realize
it's very generic, but
it's like when you hit a key, your keyboard knows what key you hit, and it sends that data into your CPU, and your CPU, your tower, whatever, is going to do something with that. I realize that's a real, probably gross oversimplification of the process.
It is, but you know me, I like analogies, and I like simplifying things to make it easier for someone new to a topic to understand.
So let me throw this, and this may be a curveball, since everything's a database anyway. What about sorting? Who would handle that? Would that be like the model? It seems like the model would handle sorting and then just...
very good.
The model would always handle sorting exactly.
It's because that's your application logic.
Yeah. All right.
The controller is very specific.
Yeah.
You see how we're interfacing with the controller. We're controlling things. And then the controller knows how to utilize or call upon application logic within the model.
The only thing that we've mentioned so far that only seems just the tiniest bit dodgy, and it's probably just because I've never used it, I can't think of a reason that this would be, is you've mentioned that the view can request data back from the model. And it seems like the view is really just, like, I keep picturing the view as just a screen. You just tell the view what to do. And the reverse interactivity from the view is intriguing to me, and I'm trying to figure out how I can apply it in my head.
Here's how it works. I mean, generally when you are working with websites, your views will always, your access to the model will always happen through the through controllers because it's a stateless application. I haven't really applied MVC very much out into to GUI applications, and what Jason was kind of describing sounds actually closer to the MVVM pattern, honestly. But the view, it displays data but also presents controls. Generally, this isn't something, I guess, that's set in stone, I guess. But generally, at least in the web development world, there's usually what's called a model binder, and that's a terrible, terrible name because it doesn't have anything to do with the model. But you have this model binder which takes your form requests from your previous form submit, so an HTML form, and it binds them to arguments on your controller's methods. So that's how it gets input from your views, because your views spool up a new request with values in the form scope that are mapped to these arguments.
Okay.
So does that kind of make sense?
Kind of. It's one of those things where I feel like I'd have to see an example in that particular case.
And just real quickly, before we get too far away from what Nelson just said,
yeah.
Even in my example, when I'm talking about the view presenting what the user sees, yes, that definitely contains the controls that the user is going to interact with. Because it's the view. It's going to have. Now again, I'm talking GUI buttons and all. I'm not a web developer. That's Nelson's world.
Right.
But if you're working with in an iPhone app and you lay out your view is going to have buttons or tables or whatever it may have. And then your view controller, the view is going to basically tell the view controller the user just did something, and it's so it really comes down to the controller now. That's the control. All right. Well, he just pressed the A button. What do we need to do? We need to change the state of the model or change the data. Maybe the A button meant to delete the movie that's currently selected. Well, deleting the movie, that is actually held within the model. The model has the data. It knows how to work with the data through all of its application logic.
Sure.
And the controller can say, hey, he just pressed the A button. This needs to be deleted.
Right. So it's like the controller would just get that A button press. It would read basically where we're at and what that A button press translates to, and then just fire out the final command over to...
I just didn't want... When Nelson said that, I realized that maybe I was talking too general, and you may not have realized that when you've got the view, when your user interface has things you're going to interact with.
Sure. Okay.
But interacting with those, all of that logic of what it does is not stored right there in the view. Again, now this is from...
Well, see, that's kind of where I had started to think that the view just pretty much did what you told it to. Because, like, okay, fine, you've got windows on a screen, a web page, a web app, whatever, and you click on stuff. Yeah, you're clicking on something that's an aspect of the view, but is that not being read by the controller as some sort of input from the user?
It's handed from the view to the controller.
Oh, okay.
But the controller still, you can still look at it as the controller going, hey, he hit the A button.
Yeah.
But that's got to come from somewhere.
Okay.
And
So it has to pass through because it has to do with something that was displayed on the screen.
Here, think about this, Zach. You know how you have links in HTML pages? Mm-hmm. And you click on the link and it starts a new request from the browser?
Right.
That's the view presents that link. The user clicks on that link, which results in the browser asking for a new request with a new URL, and that spools up the controller and the models and a new view. Does that help to clarify things?
Yeah. I'm with you.
Okay. So you want to go through this example?
Please.
Okay.
Did you, real quick, Nelson, did you have any particular problems with, because of course mine comes from GUI app development for things like iPhone, iPad, etc.
Or making your own media player.
Right. So did I have problems with what?
With what I was explaining to
no,
Zach.
no, not really. Other than generally in what I've worked with, the view won't receive anything from the model, and generally that's because because in an HTML page the view is incredibly simple and you can just package everything it needs up in a view model and send it right off.
Right. When working with iPhone apps specifically, you can very easily have views request data from a model, and then you can also have models have a state change and report to the view that there's been a state change. The view needs to update.
Right. And yeah, that sounds to me exactly like the MVVM pattern, or MVVMC if there's a controller in there.
Okay. Well, that's just the way that Apple will define it and have you develop stuff for iPhone and all.
So here's just a quick thing. We have an add person. We can type in a name, and then we get the list of the person we just created. So we can add another person, and we get another person. And now we can say list to get a list of all the people, and we can say show person, and then type in their name, and then we get their details.
Or type in their ID anyway.
Their ID, yeah, sorry.
No worries.
So does this application, what it does, make sense? I know that the GUI is terrible or the UI is awful.
It makes perfect
sense.
sense.
Hang on. If you don't mind, don't close it yet.
Yeah.
I know I said before the show I wasn't going to be jumping in like this. I just can't help it.
Sure.
So, Zach, if you don't mind me putting you on the hot seat.
No, I feel like I've been there, so I'm comfy.
Explain it back to us. What does this application
in terms
do?
of the MVC pattern?
No.
Okay.
Just based off what, if you were going to sit down and start designing, first thing you got to do is know what it is your application needs to do.
Right.
So based off what Nelson just showed you, what does this application do? So now we're just simple language.
It's a
patterns.
command-based application where instead of previously up to this point, and you should never. I guess we shouldn't really be comparing to previous programs, but humor me anyway. Where in earlier programs we've done, like in the previous video, we were immediately asked to input some sort of data. We knew exactly what data we were going to put in. In this case, that changes based on whatever command we're firing in. We've got an add person command.
Okay, so can I help simplify that? Because when I'm developing, I'm just giving people a little bit of insight on how I work. So obviously I know what the application is going to do. So in breaking it down into simple terms, so you just described it.
It has a list of commands that it can take
this
in.
application will take input from a user.
Right, and in this case, that input specifically is commands.
Okay.
And the type of data that follows that command is dependent on what command you called. In this case, we've got something like add person, which is then looking for us to add in 2 different pieces of data, a first name and a last name.
Okay, so we've got an application that will accept some sort of command from a user, and then, as you basically said, it will then act upon that command, resulting in it possibly asking for data.
It looks like it's storing data based on user inputs and dependent on the command. So it
well,
has
if
the
someone
ability to do that.
so the command list.
No, it can.
Yes,
It's just
that's what I'm
one of its bits of functionality is based on what command you call. It has the ability to store data.
Okay, so basically,
It has the ability to report that data back.
okay.
Of course, all of this is command based. We can just take that as read for now.
So I'm just trying to break it down to, don't get frustrated with me.
No. There's no frustration.
So it's an application that takes commands.
Uh-huh.
Each of those commands will respond differently. They could ask for more data from you, or for data from you, or they could result in giving you information back based off what you asked for. So it's as simple as that, right?
Right, being general information or specific information.
Okay, Nelson, I just wanted to make sure Zach was looking at this from a very simple design point of view. It helps the pattern make more sense, I think.
Right. So you see that we have lists and all these different commands, like you were saying. So I'm going to try to go through this application, starting at probably main, and then going down. We have the person model, which is a people store. So if we scroll up, we see our people store, and this is what it does. And you'll notice that this See, I don't like this, personally.
I mean, didn't you write it?
Nelson, you wrote it, man.
I did, but I'm gonna do one thing real
But
fast.
I'm gonna unwrite it.
I hope our member sponsors enjoy these just, informal, casual, sometimes head bashing in with a baseball bat sessions.
Well,
it just has to happen. Oh, he is so going to put that in there.
Oh, you didn't.
Oh, he did.
Okay, and then now what we're going to do is inside. So we have this person DTO and we have this person entity, and I need to define what exactly an entity is.
Okay.
So an entity is a object that has a unique identifier. So in this case, an entity is something that we can identify with an ID. It's something that we can that's unique inside of our system.
Okay.
A DTO, on the other hand, is just a simple value object. It just has
Right. It just stores
values.
state.
Right. If I compared one DTO with the same first name and the same last name with another instance of a DTO with the same first name and same last name, those two DTOs would conceptually be the same. Even though they're different objects, they are considered to be the same. If I have two instances of a person entity, however, and they both have the same first name and last name, they're not necessarily the same because they could have a different ID because they might be identified differently in our system.
I'm fine with that.
So we don't store DTOs, but we use DTOs to transfer data.
I was actually I really wish I'd had a chance to squeeze a word in edgewise, because what I was getting out of just reading the code And the usage was that entity is to go back to our database example, entity is what would get jammed into your database, while the DTO is the back and forth where you're like when you call a command, when you type in add person, that's going to get temporarily stored in the DTO as it gets transferred into an entity.
Yes, as it gets transferred around the system.
Okay.
So then we're going to copy those values into our object.
And to a limited degree, I'm actually familiar with doing that sort of stuff in Nell.
Do you mean copying around stuff, or?
It's almost like having a buffer object in a way.
Nelson's like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
I am not interested in your scripting.
Just because we're going to return people entities after they've been stored, even though it could be even abstracted further, but let's not. Okay, so we have this people store, and this people store has this public interface, and we don't care about how it does that. So that's what we care about. We care about these three methods. Nothing else about this class matters. It could be talking to a database, it could be talking to a file, it could be talking to a web service, it could be doing anything. We only care about these three methods because they're the only three public methods on it.
Mm-hmm.
So our three methods are our store person, which takes a person DTO and transfers it into or turns it into an entity, I guess you could say, by storing it into its internal data store. Then we have get person by ID, which returns an entity by ID, and then we have get all people, which turns an IEnumerable people, person entities. Then we have our iView interface.
And I realize that it helps you to be able to go through that stuff, but collapsing all the code like that is not necessarily all that helpful for somebody trying to see exactly what you're doing.
No. Hang on. Time out. I disagree.
Okay.
And here's why. Nelson, go ahead and close it back up.
I'm fine
because
being disagreed with.
I hope Nelson's approach is what I'm thinking, because this is what I would do.
Okay.
He's giving you a high-level overview.
Yeah.
So that way, by pulling out any code that could look scary or link usage or lambdas, you're focusing on just the core functionality. People, store, get person by ID. You don't see anything else to clutter up your vision at the moment. I like this approach.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I'm fine with that. But I mean, I like seeing how we store stuff, and that's fine. You don't want me to get distracted.
But that's getting distracted.
That's fine.
Okay.
Moving on.
So this is the entirety of our model right here. So there's an example of a model.
Do you mind putting it in a region? All right, so now that we've looked at that.
Our iView is actually infrastructure. So let's get rid of this. Call this framework. So that's our iView.
So we've looked at model. And Zach, recap for me. Don't close model yet. Yeah, sorry, man. This is how I teach. I'm so excited about Zach learning this stuff that I'm having him convince me he knows what's going on. So what does our model have? I don't want you to tell me inside each of these methods, but basically what does our model do with what's provided inside the region?
Well, okay, we've got, I don't even want to use the term DTO because it sounds like it's cheating. It has a storage object, which is going to take the raw data brought in from commands and hold on to it so it can pass it around the system. I hope that's right. And if I'm wrong, stop me before I get all the way through everything, because I don't want to have to jump back too terribly far. We have our person entity class. This is literally what is going to be stored within your database. It's generally what's going to come out of the DTO with an ID applied.
So this is an actual entity.
Yeah.
This is the dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where the DTO is just a data transmission object. It's just there to move some data around. It's totally temporary in terms of we just fired in a command to store something. Great. We got to hold on to it and move it around a little bit while the storage process takes effect. Once the storage process is done, that's been converted. That data has been transferred into an entity, which is a concrete thing that is now inside of our database.
So that's first two classes in model, and then it also.
Well, we have the people store, which can do a series of various functionality. It can list off all of the people that we have. It can list off people by an individual ID, and it has the ability to store an incoming person.
Good enough for me.
It would have to have some sort of enumerable that could actually store. It would have our storage device, so to speak. Yeah.
Right, and this could be a database or a file or a web service or whatever.
Okay, now you can close model up. So again, we're just trying to keep it from being too cluttered.
I understand.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so these guys are pretty straightforward. They all inherit from iView, or implement iView, sorry. And the reason I do that will become more clear later.
I imagine so that you can have different views.
So that I can have multiple views but use them in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Just like we learned in the last video.
Right, because all a view does is it renders. That's the contract of a view.
Right.
So we have our display person view, our confirm person view, and our display people view. And the display people view, I mean, that's a kind of composite. But okay, so do you understand what these guys do?
I do.
Well, so I mean, I'll be happy to try to take a shot at it.
Actually, do the same thing as before, if you don't mind. Just close up each of the methods.
I actually have to fix this real fast. My refactoring broke my...
Yeah, I see.
code. Oh. Yeah, I'll fix that. Well, hold on. Sorry.
It's all good.
And it's funny that that there are different opinions about how to use DTOs. There are very different opinions. If you ask any Rails person, any person who develops Rails will literally look at this code and they'll laugh at you. Because Rails is all about consolidating. No, they are rude. The Rails crowd is incredibly rude.
You hear that, Rails crowd? Oh yeah, we said it.
Nelson LeKay, that's the PM.
The Rails crowd is all about not repeating yourself, and they think that everything in the model should be represented with these entity classes that do everything. And it's just awful.
And why?
Why is it awful?
Well, okay. Well, let me bring up the first example. If you have a user store, when you create a user, you're going to be supplying different parameters than when you edit a user. Like, for example, when you create a user, you're going to supply a password, but when you edit a user, you're not going to want to type in that password every time.
Sure.
It's examples like that which really lend me to believe that the best way to go about things is to kind of separate the responsibilities of what a model does based off of commands, and not trying to shoehorn a God entity object to every single interface on your model. So that's why I use this DTO in this case, because we're not supplying an ID. The ID isn't generated by the consumers of PeopleStore. The ID is generated by PeopleStore. So why should this object have an ID? And so that's why I introduced the person DTO. And there will be people who disagree with me, but
yeah, there always will be.
I find that if you try to consolidate your code as far as a design goes, you will code yourself into a corner very quickly. So, and consolidating your code is great. I don't know. It's just kind of a rant that I have. People who know me and are listening might have heard this rant a few times.
I'll bet they have.
So we have these three view classes, and you know that they implement iView, so you know that they all have a render.
Right.
And
well, really, all I have to go on right now is their names and what I can glean from that.
Yeah, that's fine.
And what
That's
I
what
think they should be
that's what I
doing
want you to
based
do.
on that.
well, their names should be descriptive enough because they only have one responsibility.
Right. So display person view, that's going to have to be the guy who shows us a single person based off of an ID that we punch in.
The based off of part, that part comes from the model.
Okay.
The view doesn't care which person it's given.
So the model isn't going to be called. Okay, like let's say I send in the command to show me a single user based on ID, etc. And so the model's not going to call specifically on display person view in that case because we asked for that one guy.
See, the model isn't.
Okay.
That's the role of the control.
Yeah, I know I understand Zach, and everybody's saying, why am I saying that? Because they don't understand that Zach just rolled his eyes and flipped his head back, and it's like, oh, God. Let me just say this. Let's keep it simple at the moment. Display person view.
Well, it's just going to display a person.
Thank you. And we
Let's
stop
just go
right
with
there.
that. That's
Yep.
fine. I do not understand what confirm person view is going to be doing or why we need it.
Actually, that was a terrible name. It actually does the exact same thing as display person.
I agree with you it being a
different
terrible name
context.
because we already said it should be descriptive enough that I should be able to get it, so fail. Then display people view should show all of the people as opposed to just one. I mean, it seems, or at least show multiple people. We'll keep it that generic if we need to. If we wanted to get slightly more specific, he's going to show the contents of your store.
You could do
Okay.
an input person view.
Yeah.
And then I
Yeah.
already know what that's supposed to do, but that's okay.
The issue I have is I'm really uncomfortable with the views having console.read lines in them. To be honest.
Well, then just write up a GUI real quick and we'll watch. How's that?
Well, that's what I made the main for. I know that in most forms of MVC that would be right to do. It's just I'm not the most comfortable. This is actually the first time I've done a really strict MVC implementation outside of the context of a website. So I just don't want to embarrass myself trying to make something work and have it not work.
Okay, that's cool.
Nothing wrong with that.
But again, like I said, generally, when you are working with code, you'll always be able to generalize this, and that's why I wanted to go over this pattern first because it's going to be applied to almost everything.
So let's go ahead and place all of our views in a view region and collapse that down.
Okay, so now we have our people controller, and there's errors in here. I know. I'm going to fix them in a sec.
Okay.
So same thing, huh? Oh. So let's see. We have
What's line 116 again, Zach?
116, you say?
Yeah.
Oh, the people controller. I mean, is this just going to put stuff into our store?
Well, see, this is the constructor.
Yeah, I just wanted to. I just want to start making you identify these. That's all. Which is fine. That's the constructor.
Oh, okay. I'm
Same
sorry.
name
Yeah,
as the
I
class.
just wasn't thinking in the
I
same
know,
direction.
I
I
know
thought
that.
you were asking me what. Hey, never mind. Doesn't matter.
So that's the constructor. Anytime we instantiate people controller, that's going to run, and that's going to require
an incoming store.
incoming people
A reference
store.
to a
A
store.
reference to a store.
That's right.
Because that's what this controller requires to do its stuff. And its stuff are defined by these three guys.
Okay.
What you think does what?
List. Well, let's see. List people shows pictures of kittens. Okay, list people it's going to have to show the contents of our store. Add person is going to allow us to add new entities into our store, and display person is going to report back a single entity from our store.
Okay. I mean, that's really it. I mean, I can go ahead and actually make this code compile now, really quickly. It was just
got to fix all those pesky errors first.
yeah. When I moved the entity over into a DTO, it kind of freaked out on me.
Yeah.
Fix that guy. I fixed that guy.
And for those of you that are following along, after we go through it, everything's fixed and it executes properly, then I'll have Nelson open everything up and slowly go through it with explanations of method logic.
Alrighty, so let's go ahead and launch this guy. And do a list. We should get nothing. Do an add person. Should be that. We get an error. Because, oh yeah, I forgot to change my, these guys. That should be 0, and that should be 1. So we do a add person. We get reported back to us, we get a list, and we get a display 0 or a show 0 or something. I don't know, whatever it was. Okay.
I mean, you only programmed it just like a moment ago.
Go ahead and, if you don't mind, go ahead and
Show person, okay.
put the the controller in a controller region as well.
That's called continuity.
Okay. I'm actually going to start in main right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, Zach, what do you think about main?
Well, let's see. It looks like we're establishing our new people store and our new people controller, instantiating these classes.
Right.
And then it looks like we're just running an ongoing loop.
Is there anything else you want to add in regards to line 50 and 51?
Well, let's see.
Because he's demonstrating something I actually mentioned when I was giving you kind of the Xbox Media Center example.
That it's taking in an existing model?
Yeah, notice how the controller is now aware of this model. Because the controller, the people controller...
All right. I had to go back and read what our VAR was doing there. So we're instantiating a new a new people store that we're calling person model.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're feeding that into a new people controller, and we're calling that whole thing the person controller.
Yeah, and so now the controller is very much aware of the model.
Yeah.
He can talk to the model. He knows the model now.
They're
because
associated.
the new instance of people controller has a model in it. So he can reference the model. I just wanted to point out the
No, it's good.
association.
Okay. So then you got, standard input stuff. I think you already identified what's going on there as far as that. But, then you notice inside of those input, at least as far as list goes, all it does is,
It goes
You guys
back up
see
to
what's going on?
those commands that we established earlier inside of our person controller. So if I say list, it's going to fire off list people and call on its render method to render those off to the screen.
Yeah, well, this is kind of a weird example. This method actually returns a iView object.
Okay.
So that's why we can call render on it. And then list people is going to stuff the right view object into that iView return parameter, and then we're going to just call .render on it. So this is actually two objects. We have the person controller up to here, and then up to here we are now operating on the object that list people returns, which is an instance of an iView.
Okay. All right. You just have to know that there's a return type there and know what that is.
Yes.
All right. I'm fine with that.
Okay. And then the more complicated ones are pretty much just because they're taking input.
Right, they have to. So you're taking whatever your console read line is and storing the first thing in first name, and last name, etc. And then you're calling on add person. Now, I'm just, okay, just making sure I'm following along. If you're calling on add person just to get all of that data stored, and then you're taking the result of that and calling on its render functionality to put that up on the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
And whatever add person returns, because add person, if you look at the signature, returns an iView.
Right.
We know that iView has a render.
Has a render, exactly.
And we can always just do, control space on it, and we see the IntelliSense.
Sure.
All right, and then the show person is pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, it's more or less the same thing. Let's just convert to int32 console read line. I mean, is that how you're just incrementing some ID number?
Well, console.readline, the ID is an integer. If you look at display person, you see that. The ID is an integer that it requires, but console.readline returns a string.
Yeah.
So we have to convert that into an integer so that we can pass it into our display person. So we're taking a string variable, and then we're turning that into
right. So you get the alphanumerics for 100.
yes, and then turn that into an integer number that we can then use as an
Okay,
int.
so you weren't automatically just dropping on like a 0 for the first one and a 1 for the next one and so on?
How do you mean?
Now, think functionality here. Display person is just to display a person. So it has no need to generate numbers. It just
Never
needs to know
mind.
which
Okay,
person you
I'm
want
sorry.
to display.
I'm going in the wrong direction. I was under the working assumption that this had something to do with generating that ID, and it really doesn't.
Right.
Okay.
It's just pulling out that ID and then converting it into something that'll display and then rendering it. That's all.
Yep.
So yeah, I was just slightly off on that, but yeah. I guess it makes sense because all of the functionality for producing that ID should be up in your model anyway.
Yes. Okay, so so and obviously the first point of contact here really is the people controller or the person controller, because that's what we're modifying. That's what we're calling methods against. So as far as list people returns a new display people view, and then it gives that display people view data from the model, which is store.getAllPeople. The store is the field. It started off as an argument in the constructor, and it was created when we passed it in from person model into here, from person controller, and we get it stuffed into this constructor, and we store it in a field for later use.
So that's referencing our model, though.
Right.
Yes. Then our add person constructs a person DTO, and then tells the store to save it, and then renders that terribly named confirmed person view with that person DTO, which is just going to parrot that data back at you.
Right.
Then the display person is going to call a method on the model, get person by ID, and return a new display person view with that person entity.
Yeah, that all makes sense.
Okay, and then you have the model, which, I mean, I think you've already pretty much gone over as far as how it works, but all we're doing here is when we create it, we instantiate our own local linked list of a person entity. And you've seen us use list a lot, right?
Yes, I have.
I'm using linked list here. I actually generally use linked list more often than list, simply because the underlying data storage mechanism of a list is that it creates a contiguous block of memory to store all your data in. But then whenever you try to add an item onto it that doesn't fit in that contiguous block of memory, it then deletes it, makes a new one, copies all the old stuff into the new one, and then adds the data on top of that. And so potentially insertions can be really expensive with lists. Linked lists, on the other hand, use a different data storage or data structure, and they allow you to have really fast inserts because it doesn't have to recreate contiguous blocks of memory. And I don't care because I always just use link, and link relies on IEnumerable, and enumerating over a linked list is just as performant as enumerating over a list. The only difference is you can't reference linked lists by their index. So if I were to do this to get the first entity, this would be invalid. Because
You have to have some sort of... I guess that's why we have the ID at this point.
Oh, yeah, that's...
I mean, like, because you have a linked list, you require something like an ID that you can grab an entry by? Is that what you're saying?
It's not necessarily a requirement, but what I'm saying is that enumerating over a linked list is just as performant as enumerating over a list. It's just you don't have access to random access is what it's called.
Okay.
Whenever you see me use linked list, just remember you could use linked list here and it'd work just fine. The differences are really minimal, but there's a reason why I have started using linked list more, because ultimately I just use link on everything anyway. So I might as well.
Okay.
Yeah, that was kind of a...
It's a tangent, but it was a useful tangent. We'll just go with it.
Okay, so also linked lists are in system collections generics, just like lists. Also, okay, so we have getPersonById, by ID, which uses the link method single or default on this predicate. So we're comparing all the objects by ID, returning the first one. Actually, single or default won't return the first one. The reason I use single is because single will throw an exception if it finds more than one object that matches this predicate, which is essentially just a sanity check, so that my ID creation code isn't screwing up somewhere and creating duplicate IDs. This will throw an exception because it'll find that if there's more than one, then there's an error.
Okay.
then the or default means if there's none, then return null. So that way I could, the client code calling getPerson by ID could say if the result was null, then they didn't find one.
All right.
Then storePerson uses people.addLast. AddLast is a linked list method. The equivalent to list would be add.
Yeah.
It just appends a new person entity to the end of the list. And then we copy all the values out of the DTO in addition to setting the ID to people.count.
Okay.
Which is just a way of creating an auto-incrementing ID, because the next time this is called people.count is going to
Would be one
then
bigger.
2. Yeah.
It also means it should be 1-based instead of 0-based.
Well, the add last, this happens before the first add.
Yeah.
So
the person will
the
be
first
0.
ID.
You're right.
Yeah.
I understand.
It's kind of weird saying the code like that, because this actually this all executes before this.
That happens a lot.
So then get all people, just as people.toArray.
Okay,
and
sure.
the reason I do .toArray is because if I were to just return people, even if I had it in this IEnumerable type, people could still cast it back into a linked list and then start adding people, which would be terrible.
Yeah.
So I use .toArray to basically copy it.
Okay.
But the client code doesn't care. It's the same interface. It's always an IEnumerable.
And all you have to do is return it, because it's later on that you're taking whatever you return and calling on its .render to show it on the screen.
How do you mean?
I was just looking at the functionality for displaying all of this stuff at the far end of things.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so that's our model.
Mhm.
It's pretty simple.
So
and
far?
then we have the view. Well, I mean, that's the entirety of the model. So
Oh, I know.
So then we have these 3 classes, and I'll first show you how they're used. For example, in our list people action, we return a new display people view, and then we pass in what it needs to do, or what it needs. The constructor in this case is the contract that the controller has to fulfill in order to render this view, because although views are dumb, they still know what they need to display. And they enforce that by requiring that in the constructor. And other MVC frameworks do different things, this is just a way of enforcing that constraint, that to create a new display people view, you have to have a IEnumerable of people. Otherwise, there's no data to render. So if I open it up, you see that it takes an IEnumerable person entity and stores it locally, and then sits on it until a method called to render.
Okay.
And then, this render, actually all it does is it takes the people and turns it into another view and then invokes it on that.
Okay.
So basically it calls the display person view on every single person
Sure.
and then renders each of those.
Renders each one individually.
Yeah. So actually this kind of left me, this was a difficult design decision for me. It just was fun to write, but I probably would never do this in real code, because 2 views shouldn't have to depend on each other. So I'm going to break that out right now, just because it was fun to write, but not all code that's fun to write is something you should do. I'm just going to copy this directly out, because we don't want to couple our views, obviously. Okay, so now all it does is prints out every person that's passed in as part of the people, which is passed in from the people argument from the constructor. So do you understand the signal flow between the get all people all the way down to the console.read line, or write line?
I'm looking.
It's important to know that .render is never called by the controller. So this is actually, by instantiating this new view, we don't actually do anything.
Sure.
And we only do that when we're back in main, and main manually calls the render on each view that all these guys return. So that might be confusing.
Oh, I know why you... Yeah. Never mind.
Wow, you just like pulled a Nelson.
Yeah, never mind.
You actually made an exclamation.
It's all good.
Yeah.
It's a great example,
Mm-hmm.
but except for part of the view stuff. I understand why, if we scroll back down, so down in main right here, I understand with the console.readline exactly where he went.
Mm-hmm.
This, again, from GUI application development, this is your view stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This is the stuff that you are looking at, and think of it as a GUI application, and you need to type in your first name and last name and hit a add user button. That would be on your display,
Sure.
that your view.
Mm-hmm.
And you would type those into these two boxes, and then you
Click
would
a button.
hit the button, which would then, from there, notify the controller.
So View would take that data and use it to notify the controller?
And it's
Or it would just notify the controller and the controller would grab the
and
data?
think about what Nelson's got here. He's got that.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Are you saying
reading-
that this functionality should be in the view itself and
to,
not in main?
To me, yes. I understand why Nelson says he just absolutely hates that idea. But this is view stuff. This is, you're looking at the screen and it's waiting for input. So what if this isn't a text box that you're going to type in? You're still waiting for input. And then what is he doing? The view gets the input from the person, just like I was saying earlier, and what does he do with it? He notifies the controller.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That's all I'm saying.
But see, in order to do that cleanly in a way that doesn't set off my OCD, it would require a lot of infrastructure. So, because that's also kind of getting into HMVC, hierarchical MVC, and yeah, I don't know. It just seemed cleaner and it's more familiar to me because that's what I do.
That's fine.
I understand, but it is good to hear both angles of it. Honestly,
Because
well, I was just going to say, to a certain degree, that thought had crossed my mind based on the discussion that Jason and I had regarding the role of the view object. But because of the way it was presented here, I just kind of took it as read. And I realize that's dangerous, but sometimes when you're new to a topic, it's very difficult to be able to break out what you should just be taking as read and what you should say, oh, wait, hang on a minute. Is this doing what it's, what you said it should be doing? But I can actually see both sides of it in this case.
Right. Well, it goes back to what I was saying about the variance of MVC, and there's no real true way of MVC. I mean, there is ultimately I don't know. The thing is that nothing's ever really perfect, and there's always going to be sacrifices depending on which environment you're in.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, So.
I just wanted to share that with Zach so that just in case somewhere deep down inside he was thinking, wait a minute, now it looks like there's view stuff that's just floating outside of what we've clearly defined as the model, the view, and the controller.
Right. And yeah, in my experience with WPF and Silverlight, you use the MVVM pattern, where your view model is bound directly to, so properties on your view model are bound directly to user controls.
Mm-hmm.
And then your view model also exposes what are called commands, which are bound to buttons and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's how it kind of communicates. So the model binding in WPF itself will bind text boxes and stuff to your strongly typed view model, and then when a command happens, your view model takes that current state and performs something.
Gotcha.
And yeah, like I said, there's a bunch of different variants and stuff. So, but yeah, so okay, so we have list people, and then we have add person, which takes the first name and last name, constructs a DTO, stores it, returns a new confirm person view, which just prints out the DTO. Doesn't do anything special.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, none of these views are really all that complicated. The display people view just takes an IEnumerable people, and the display person just takes a single person in the constructor, and then he goes on in his render method to display a single person, which you see right there.
The only thing that you could possibly do is to make it a little bit easier for Zach to see, in my opinion, is take some of these more complex calls and break them up into multiple lines.
I like which lines?
Get all the way back down to the rendering area where you're calling rendering or render.
Okay.
Again, I'm just trying to make it black and white for someone.
Yeah,
to,
now, I was able to grasp that after the first bit, because, I mean, I'll admit, the first time I saw the person.controller.listpeople.render, it did throw me off for just a second. Though once we got through with the understanding that person.controller.listpeople was going to have a return type, and then what we were doing is calling render on that return, then I was okay with that. But it is nice to break it out for anybody else who's following along as well.
It's okay, Nelson.
It'll be all right, man. No worries.
No. Generally, I usually tend to prefer expressions over statements. So.
I understand, but we're trying to benefit as many people as we can, especially Zach here.
And I prefer, typing code as opposed to drawing it on a chalkboard, but you have to make certain exceptions when you're in a classroom. So,
does that make it a little easier to read, Zach?
yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Okay, so do you kind of understand the MVC pattern at all?
Yeah, but I tell you what, I don't know if we ever did this, and if we did, I either didn't take the note, or which I thought I've been pretty good about taking notes. If I asked you to just overview the MVC pattern in like 1 to 2 sentences at most, the whole thing, the whole concept, the idea behind MVC, how would you describe it to somebody? And it's something that it's like I felt we should have done at first, and I honest to goodness don't remember us actually doing. I think we just jumped right into the definition of model and right into the definition of view and then the controller, but we never actually stopped and said, all right, well, here's what MVC is and here's why it's important to you. And I realize it's a little tragic to get to this bit an hour and 16 minutes into the video, but it's just something that occurred to me.
MVC is about separation of concerns.
Is that not true to some degree in like all design patterns?
Yeah, but MVC is like it's one of those overarching realizations that your code is probably going to consist of code that does stuff, code that shows stuff to a user, and code that mashes those two things together.
Okay, I'll go with that. And I know that much information has kind of could be distilled from everything that we've discussed up to this point. But I just didn't feel like anywhere along our discussion so far, even the whole hour of it, which has been really good, and I've drawn a lot from it, we never actually just stopped and tried to give one blanket statement as a description.
Okay, well, I think separation of concerns would be the best.
I don't know about that, because it just seems like everything I've heard about design patterns, it's like everything is really about separation of concerns. You could go all the way back to SRP and say that's about separation of concerns. So it's almost like saying that MVC is about separation of concerns. It's kind of like a cop-out. Well, I mean, it's okay if you don't agree with me, but that's how I see it. So what I'm getting at is, how would you quickly describe to somebody what the MVC pattern is?
It's a way to organize code based off of if a piece of code falls into 3 particular categories. I don't know.
It's the way to
Something like
isolate code that's responsible for displaying stuff to a viewer.
Mm-hmm.
The code that is going to handle all of the logic for what your application does and hold and manage that data.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, the code that is responsible for connecting the two up, the controller.
Okay.
And
that's fine. Like I said, I have already kind of pulled that. I've gleaned that from what we've talked about so far.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to make sure it got said out loud.
The really nice thing about it is how easy, if you need to add a whole new view in, think about how easy that is to do. All you need to do now, in Nelson's case, he's got an interface available.
Right. Make sure that you
can simply implement that
implement the
interface on a new view. Now we're guaranteed to have render, and now you can handle displaying data however you want, and you get the idea.
Yeah, I do. But I guess another question, and maybe this is, I hope this question doesn't come across as naive, and even if it does, I don't care. I'm going to ask it anyway.
Good.
Under what circumstances do you think one should be able to identify that they would utilize the MVC pattern? I'm a coder. I've just decided I've got this great program that I want to write. Now, try to help me see what would be, under what circumstances I'd go like, okay, well, it makes sense for me to try to implement MVC in my code. Because I think that's something that will be extremely useful from people trying to learn this. Because I think we could spend weeks, months, going over pattern by pattern by pattern until we've exhausted every design pattern out there. And I still think you'd end up with people sitting down to draft out their program and suddenly stop and go, yeah, well, which one of these should I use? So in this case, and just shoot from the hip, Nelson. It doesn't have to be anything hardcore. It doesn't have to be pulled from a textbook. Under what circumstances do you find yourself reaching for the MVC pattern?
All the time.
Yeah, but why?
Well, the framework that I spend almost 8 hours of every day in is called ASP.NET MVC, so...
Don't cop out on me.
When a person should decide to use a design pattern, initially it should be forced. They should, go through the pattern a few times, but after that, just stop doing that.
Yeah.
If you identify a problem that you can, when you identify a problem that can be easily solved with the past knowledge that you have about design patterns, then use that pattern. And especially if you've identified that code that you're writing follows a particular pattern, then definitely start naming that code to that pattern so it's easier to communicate with other developers.
Yeah.
Actually, just about, GUI applications can all take advantage of MVC.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that application only has that one pattern applied.
Right.
That's a high-level pattern to start with keeping your code set up so that it's flexible, it's extendable,
and
easily maintained.
That's one of the interesting things, and I realize I don't want our discussion to branch too far away, especially when I'm just now getting into something that I probably should have thrown out there a little earlier. But better late to the party than never to it. It seems more and more like design patterns as a general concept are really more about philosophical approaches to developing your code than they are about anything else.
Yeah,
kind of. I guess.
Yeah, kind of, but they're proven solutions. Oh, I'm feeding back through.
Yeah, you're feeding back through somehow.
And so are you.
That might be my bad. I don't know. I'm not doing anything.
That whatever you just scooted fixed it.
No, it didn't.
Did it? Anyway.
I'm sorry, guys.
No, it's all good. We'll let you talk for a minute.
I'm just demonstrating something that I think Jason's probably already picked up on, but...
Sorry, I was actually watching Zach's expressions as I was explaining instead of looking at code. But that's okay, because you're going to explain through it here in just a second. But they're proven solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is, people that don't know design patterns and they just start coding, as they start developing more complex applications, they're going to run into scenarios where they're like, oh, what's the best way that I need to handle this particular problem? And then they're going to work on it, and they're going to try different classes and working with the data, with behavior, state, etc. And what's funny is very often what people end up doing is coming up with a solution that works, and they're happy, and they move on. But what they don't realize is they have actually implemented a design pattern that's already been a proven pattern to solve a particular problem.
So they're protocols.
So they're just, they're out there as just solutions that you can grab and apply in applicable situations.
Well, and that's the thing. That's where my brain locks up only because of the language and the terminology. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying I'm having a hard time understanding. But it's like the general concept of a design pattern. What is it? You can't say a design pattern is a design pattern, and you can't say it's a solution, really. It's an approach. It's a means to organize your code. It's a protocol for organizing your code in a specific way. Am I wrong?
They're examples of how to use specifically object-oriented practices to accomplish goals.
Okay.
They're specific examples of how to use those to accomplish goals.
There you go.
Yeah.
But anyway, you want to see a magic trick?
Always.
Now, don't fail with this one, Nelson.
Yeah, the last magic trick you had kind of fell flat.
Okay. Oh,
Ah, no.
No, we need a
Because
round
you
of
said
applause.
just because you said it.
Uh,
Actually, no way. Hold on. Let me fix it.
I need like a drum roll soundboard for the next time he does that.
Okay.
magic trick time, part 2.
Yes. So we now have 2 Nelson Lacays, right?
How would you pronounce that, really?
Lakati?
I don't know. I wonder why there's 2 of them now. There shouldn't be 2 of them.
No.
So is that the magic trick
yeah.
that you pump in
No,
one
I'm
and you get 2? It's
Well, that's a pretty cool
yeah,
trick.
that is a pretty nifty trick, dude.
No, I'm stupid. Hold on. I'm just going to use that list because I just need to get this done real fast
Why are you switching to a list?
so I can store stuff in it.
Because a linked list doesn't store stuff?
Oh, it does, but there's no to linked list link method.
Ah.
There should be. Should make one. Now I can just do .add last. I don't even know why I did a union. That's kind of dumb. Or add, sorry.
You got all
Never
excited
places-
about your magic trick. It happens.
Just give me a sec. Come on.
Yeah, Zach, just be patient.
I wasn't pushing anybody toward anything.
Okay.
Mercy.
So as long as everything compiles, it should work.
All right, let's pretend nothing ever happened. So, all right, hang on. We're not done with the pretending yet. Oh, no, come on.
Sorry, you always got to have that dude in the audience who clears their throat. So that was me that time.
Coding on the fly
It's fun.
is extremely challenging.
Oh, yeah.
I've been blown away by how good Nelson is at it.
All right. No, there's 2 people.
Yes.
Okay,
guess.
but that's actually good.
But why do they both have the same ID?
That's bad.
Yeah.
Good, Isaac.
Actually, hold on.
Like quiet.
Hold on, it's add person. Okay, I'm gonna do display, or
You don't remember what you called it, do you?
I'm gonna do show person.
Okay.
I'm gonna see how good your memory is. Now I'm gonna type in 0 and hit enter, and do you know what's gonna happen?
Well, I mean, if we've got 2 entries that both have 0, are we going to see both of the Nelsons? Or did you clear that out somehow?
It's actually an implementation detail of my code.
That means nothing to me.
It's actually something I slightly went over as I
Yeah,
was showing you.
he
store-
mentioned it.
store class.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead and hit it.
Hit it.
Uh,
I mean, are we going to get Nelson Test? No, we're going to get Nelson Lacetti.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me!
Nelson was expecting an error.
Yeah, I was expecting an
He-
exception.
yeah, he was.
Right?
He told it to throw an exception if we had multiples in there. But he's been doing a whole bunch of coding, and I've been looking at you. So I don't.
You gotta be kidding me! Oh. Weird. That second Nelson Lacay disappeared, I guess, somehow. This is weird. Alright, so now we have a list, and we have...
Or something close to a list.
This is just bizarre. It's showing twice for everything, and the reason why is because...
Are you calling render twice or something?
No, maybe... Oh, maybe. Maybe. List. No, render once. List people. What does list people do? It returns a display people view. A display people view goes over...
Ooh. Do we have a right line?
This other line must have somehow snuck.
Oh.
Copy pasting.
Okay.
It's like
So now
a
we have
double
two
mint
people.
gum commercial. It was great.
So now we have 3 people.
Uh-huh.
Now I close this application and I run it.
Here comes the magic trick.
I do list. Bam. 3 people.
Hey.
Now remember before how it was just in memory?
Yes.
Without changing a single line of code that wasn't a bug fix, I changed
Yeah, thanks
the
for
entire,
clarifying that.
I changed the entire storage mechanism of this people store to actually use a file.
Ah.
And so I can just show you that file for now. It should be under my bin directory called db.
That's kind of like showing me what's up your sleeve before you even really get to the crux of your trick.
Hang on, Nelson.
Hang on, he's got to bring you something.
Yeah.
Dun 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 dun.
Yeah, 1 second. We've got a few things over here that this opened in that are in
You know, one down from that is close all but me.
yeah, that is a good point.
It's pretty awesome. Actually.
Yeah, there we go. And it's
huge.
It's small. There you go.
There you go.
Okay, so there it is. That's my new database store.
Ah, yes.
And because of the separation between model view and controller, I changed the entire storage mechanism, the entire model of this application to be persisted in a file.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome and groovy. How?
Without changing a
How'd you do it?
single line of code.
No, you had
Did I
to
do it?
change something. Come on.
Well, no, without a single line of code outside of the people store.
Oh, okay.
So you see the people store in the constructor.
Yeah.
It says if file exists db,
Yeah.
then create a new stream reader, do a bunch of stuff to it, and get a bunch of person entities out of it.
Yeah.
So that just does the so from line and read to end split on new lines. So this will turn into an enumeration of all the lines, lines being strings.
Sure.
And then I'm going to trim it. So remove all the spaces, make sure the length is greater than 0 for the individual line. I'm going to split the line on commas. So in this case, this will be a 3-member array with all 3 of those items showing up. The ID, the first name, and the last name. And then it takes those and hydrates a person entity with those parts.
Groovy.
Then just calls toList on it. Otherwise, if the file doesn't exist, we just initialize an empty list. Then in our store person, we now call the save method, which just does this.
Which, by the way, inside a model, when it gets fired up, model gets created, it gets its data.
Right.
Yeah, Nelson's still there.
Yeah, with creates a new stream writer, writes a line. That's actually why I got the extra new line. Should be just right. So then we're this is I really do prefer expressions because I kind of can read this easier, but a person who's not used to reading it might freak out. But it's actually useful probably to start the expression right here. So we're taking the people and we're mapping them to it might be good to start right here. So we're taking a person and we're calling string.format, then comma separating their items. So this expression evaluates into 0, Nelson, Lakay.
Yeah.
And then we're doing that on every single person and turning that into an IEnumerable that we're passing into string.join with the first parameter being a new line, meaning every single one of these people rows is going to be separated by a new line. And then we're taking that entire expression and writing it to this database file.
Yeah, I followed you all the way back through.
Okay. So yeah,
If you asked me to rewrite that expression for you, I might just give you a really cool blank stare. Go back to sipping my margarita, but yeah, I followed what you did.
Okay. So sweet. So that's an example of one of the benefits that MVC gives us because we completely changed the way this model works, and the rest of our application didn't have to be touched.
Yeah, that's wicked.
Do you want a challenge, Nelson?
Sure.
You like doing on-the-fly stuff, and here's what I'm thinking. At 1 hour and 33 minutes right now, if you're up for going on a little bit longer, we'll continue with MVC, and this whole video will just be MVC, because if we get into another topic, then this will easily be a
3, 6, 9 hour
but
video.
I think we can still hit on this a little bit more. Here's a challenge. What would you think about walking Zach through converting this over to a WinForms app and organizing your code, still utilizing just an MVC?
He didn't just jump up and say sure.
There was a hesitation
Well,
there.
I'm trying to think, because it's going to have to be it's still going to be this gnarly little main guy down here. But do you mean replacing all our views essentially, Jason?
Yeah, what if we wanted a little GUI app that you know, we get rid of the console, and we want to be able to add somebody in. It means we're going to be dealing with a button and a text box. And
Okay, so yeah, so let's go ahead and do that. Hopefully fast.
and if not,
Take as much time as it takes.
yeah, this is really cool stuff that Zach gets to see, our viewers get to see, and this is a lot better than us saying this is the end of the video.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone thinks we've gone
Actually,
on too long, they can end the video. Go ahead.
I could do a WPF app and show MVVM.
Can we
Using
can
this.
we try to just keep it to MVC, and so that we can say the topic was all just MVC?
Yes.
Well, MVVM is a subset of MVC.
You know, and then so what would make sense to me, and by all means disagree, argue, whatever, is you could have a separate video over variants of MVC, where you could discuss things like MVVM or MVP, as you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
And this is just for a little fun.
Yeah, it's just kind of an application test, I suppose you could say.
Okay, so let's create our views, and we're just gonna go ahead and add a new folder, which is up here for some reason, called views, and then let's go ahead and add a new Windows form. Let's do, I don't know, display person, or let's do. So what would you call the view, the main view, Jason? I mean, that's kind of like our program. I'm probably just going to keep that in the program.
Okay.
So then I'll start re-implementing our views.
But if
So
we stop right here, the first thing that I want Zach to realize is, because this is interesting, Nelson's going through a design phase right now.
Mm-hmm.
He's thinking about, all right, how do I want to break this all up?
Sure.
Utilizing this pattern.
Sure.
I just wanted to point that out, Nelson, because that's exactly what you're doing.
Right.
Does
Okay,
this
so
kind of stuff generally take place on pencil and paper when you first get started with something, or do you?
It depends.
Yeah, same for me.
Yeah.
Sometimes I know exactly what I want to do, and I know a pattern very
That
well,
fits it.
and it just
Yeah.
coded in. Sometimes I need to see the bigger picture
Yeah.
of how things relate to one another, and that's when I'll start sketching stuff out and see if I run into any problems or limitations. But that's just me.
So we now have our display people view.
Mm-hmm.
Just going to be here are people. And then it's going to have a list view. This is so nostalgic.
Awesome.
I haven't played with WinForms for a very long time. It's kind of choppy over the team viewer, though.
I imagine.
Yeah, but you're doing great.
I hate it when people don't put in anchors. Like, that always got me really upset when people do not anchor their controls in applications. See, if I didn't have this anchor in...
But what if they
watch
just mark the application as non-sizable?
Well, you could, but then it's boring.
Nice.
Okay. Have you ever added an environment variable to your Windows box, ever?
Yeah.
That box needs to resize in the next iteration of Windows.
I
Because it is...
I agree, yeah, because you end up with lines that are 12 miles long, and yeah.
But see, without anchor, you
Yeah.
have this. And then with anchor, you can make it so it's anchored. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
But that always got me, where people just didn't spend the 2 seconds to do this right. And also people who don't name their controls.
And you can talk through to let Zach know what you're doing, because this is all new to Zach.
Yeah, I have no idea what you're doing, man.
I'm creating a list view little collection thingy.
That's the technical term, obviously.
Yeah. This is just a designer for WinForms.
Yeah. I think we've seen this in, I don't remember, honestly, if it was in Nelson's Corner or if it was in one of our web development sessions.
Yeah, we saw the other designer.
Oh, okay. Well, we saw something a lot like this. We'll just go with that.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and right-click.
I could have swore we turned a console app into a
I
WinForms
could have
app
sworn
once.
we did,
No,
too.
we did,
But...
but we never used the designer. We just wrote in code.
Ah, okay. Oh, yeah, that's true. We did. I do remember that.
Look at us go.
So anyway, then we're going to delete all this unnecessary stuff.
It's funny in a way. I would generally picture Nelson as hating designers.
I do hate designers.
He's just doing this quick. He does.
That makes sense. I'm down with it.
See, WPF, you don't need a designer. And I want to do this in WPF, but that would require MVVM and data binding and all that fun stuff. Okay, so our display people view is going to take an IEnumerable of people. And actually, I'm going to do something real fast. I'm going to hit Control-Shift-R and say Move Types into Matching Files. So now we have all of our individual types in different files, and then I'm going to go ahead and do abstract on view. And then I'm going to adjust its namespace so that it's console application.abstract.iview. And then I'm going to, yeah, that's fine, I guess. Nah, I might as well. Most MVC applications, you're going to see stuff like this. You're going to see controllers, and then you're going to see views, and then you're going to generally see something like model, or model's going to be in another assembly entirely. And then these views are then going away anyway, so I'll just delete them. And then I'm going to go ahead and adjust namespaces on everything so that everything's consistent. Okay, then close all, because ReSharper opened up every single file.
Yes.
Okay, so now we're going to go into our display people view, and we're going to take an IEnumerable of person entity, name it people, and then we're going to store it in a local variable, and then on form load. I'm just double clicking on the form, by the way.
Okay.
And that brings up that event.
Oh, cool.
And this isn't working because it's not public. Okay. You can ignore that. It's just that this is a public class, and person entity has to be a public class in order for another public class to take it as its constructor argument. And then I'm going to, or make it, no, I didn't really want to make it static. I wanted to fix the, oh well. Okay, so then on load, we're going to loop over all our people. Actually, we could just do this. I believe you can assign this. No, I don't think you can, actually. I don't think this has a setter. If this has a setter, I can do this in one line of code, but because it doesn't, I have to break it out into a for each statement. I hate when they do that. So then we're going to do list item. There's a new list view item. That's what's required for the list view to render. And then we give it a list of strings. Each one of these strings is going to go into the corresponding column.
Okay.
So this will be string 0, this will be string 1, this will be string 2. So ID, or never mind, it's an array, so it's just going to be person.id, person.firstname, person.lastname. And it's going to throw an error because ID is not a string. But if we do that, it won't throw an error. I'm going to break this out. Do that. And then I'm going to replace this assignment and replace it with people list. And remember, people list is the list view control name.
Okay.
Do list view item add, and like that.
And that's actually putting them into your little view there.
Yep. And I'm going to instruct ReSharper to rename that with an underscore. Okay, so there's our display people view. And so if we go into our people controller, we can now, well, I mean, all we had to do is that. And the only last issue is that our display people view doesn't inherit or implement iView. So to fix that, we can go back to our display people view.cs, implement iView. which will require us to implement the render method, if you remember.
Mm-hmm.
Because iView,
Yes.
the interface iView declares that we need
That
a
we
render
need
method.
Right.
And in that case, we're just going to do show dialog, which is a method on the form object.
Okay.
When the form object is what we're inheriting with display people view.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we can just return null for now, just so we can watch the application work, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Now if we run it, and we do list, we should get a nice little form. And I didn't implement the close button, but we can fix that in a second. The reason we don't get the form is actually because I turned this into a Windows application, and we don't get our console. And I'm going to change that back so we get our console so we can use it for now. Just so we can migrate things, piecemeal, I guess. And then we're going to implement this close button by just double-clicking on it, and then calling something close, and then instruct resharper to rename it. So now we get a console, and we can type in a list, and we should get a form.
Groovy.
And so that's our form, that's our list of people, so we can hit close, and it goes away. And if you were wondering why there wasn't any styling, it's because, just like the other video, I have to do this, I'm sorry. Enable visual styles. So now if we do this, we get
Yeah.
some nice Windows 7 stuff. And then our button is nice and stuff. And also we can resize it because I wasn't lazy and didn't implement the anchor. So yeah, so there's our GUI for displaying people. Basically you just repeat this process until you're done. The only issue would be getting data back that at least I would have from it. Like I said, I've never really done this in a MVC, in a strict MVC sense.
Well,
So-
the getting data back from it becomes a little more interesting because it's like that was almost more important.
When you say getting data back from, are you talking about back to the console? Or
From the view, I mean getting data from the view back into the controller, which would normally be handled for me by the model binder in ASP.NET MVC. But unfortunately, the way I see this being designed, I just don't see a clean way to do this, because in order for a view to take input and result in an action, it's going to have to call on the controller, which is going to cause a nest of controller actions being fired. You know what I mean?
okay.
Is that something that's acceptable in that sort of development? Can I get a reference to the controller from here and invoke on it from a view?
You could. Usually it's your controller, though, that has the view and is handling putting stuff there. Well, yeah. Yes.
See, I'm just so uncomfortable with that, because then that's kind of why I suggest MVVM, because that provides a clean way that doesn't make me lose my mind in order to handle this sort of stuff.
so dramatic.
But you see, though, that we replaced the view code without touch, and this is the biggest point, I think, that we're trying to make here, though, is because all we did was replace this one view class, and that's it. And because we replaced this one view class, we now have a completely different view, and that's an important thing about MVC, is that we're not having to edit our model or our controller.
Maximum flexibility.
Yeah.
That's what we have here with using this pattern.
Well, we've already seen
Like the first stages of starting to turn it into a Windows form, and that was not too bad.
Yeah, like I said, I would have... I wish I had investigated this particular thing before the video, because I have never been put in the position where I was using a strict MVC pattern in the context of a GUI.
No
Well, I
worries.
threw it out there as a challenge just to let you kind of ponder it and think about how you'd break it up, because it's you're now put into a real design scenario. It's how would you try to apply this pattern to this?
And I think, as Nelson was saying, it may end up being one of those situations where, based on your experience, as you start to get more of these patterns under your belt, you might realize that in a case like that, it may be better to go with one of the variants of MVC.
Right, well, the only way that we could do this is by adding controller methods that don't do anything. So adding a new controller method called view, it'd be something like present add person form. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then this would return a new add person form. And then the add person form,
But do you see what I've actually got Nelson doing what I was hoping for. He's in a design state.
Yeah, he's having to think about it.
well, I guess that we would need to add some sort of way for when a form closes, if it's a particular type of form, it needs to communicate back into the main this code.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And this code needs to be able to take this communication and turn it back into something that could use. For example,
Well, what if I'll just because I don't. I'm just going to give you hint thoughts. What if, when the program launched, the main screen, the main view, wasn't a console, but was the display people view? It began with that. If that gets closed, your whole app is closed. So from that, you always see the people. You could double click on a person to get a new window that pops up on top of that with a person view, or you could hit an add button that you could add to the display people view, which would then pop up a small dialog with 2 text boxes, 2 labels in it saying, to add a person. You could type it in, hit the add button. But you will always go back to the display people view.
right. So that would be essentially become
That would be like main.
my main, right? Yeah. So implementing that way.
You've almost got it.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just nuke this guy.
Okay.
And then create my new main guy. See, the thing is MVC in the context of GUI has already been solved for me in the form of MVVM and WPF.
But,
so I don't
but
know.
no, that's fine. But do you see why I like this idea? One, we just said it was a bonus. Anyone who wants to, they can hit stop.
Yeah.
2, you're having to think about how to apply the pattern to this scenario. I like that. And you're thinking about it out loud. That's great.
And the only catch on my end is I don't really have a lot to throw in here.
Yeah, but you're looking, you're watching.
Yeah, that's all.
You're at
I
least
can do.
seeing. This is bonus stuff. Zach.
Yeah.
Hate designers.
Well, you gotta admit they're nice for prototyping.
No. I'm sorry, Zach.
Come on, Zach, stand your ground.
You
Ask
don't have
him
to apologize to me. The proof is in the pudding. Do you know why that is? You're using it right now to prototype.
Oh.
No,
No,
was gonna do
I'm sorry.
WPF,
It's done.
but I
It's
started
done.
crying, so-
It's done, Nelson. You're already using it. You reached for it first without me even having to say that. It's over, man. Your argument, you shot it in the foot before you even made it out into the street.
Oh, Zach.
See, I would be using WPF, so...
You were given an assignment. The first thing you reached for was the designer.
Thought you were about to say the gun.
Yep.
What?
There's nothing else really to add or say to that. You used what made the most sense at the time, which was the designer.
No, if Jason let me use WPF...
But I knew that this would make it more of a challenge and would require you to think for a second. But I said, were you up for a challenge?
He just had to convert it to WinForms. I heard him.
Well, I mean, the only thing worse than the designer is doing it without the designer, to be honest with you.
There you go. Thank you for closing up my argument for me. I appreciate that.
But that's because it's so bad.
Well, it's just It's rare that you get your opponent to actually give you your closing remarks. So thank you. So yeah, they are kind of nice for prototyping. Because it'd be even worse if you didn't have it, apparently. So says Nelson.
Well, if you're trying to do win forms like, I don't know. Oh. So you hear much about C# 5, Jason?
I've done a little bit of reading a few weeks back when they were discussing some of the new things about it, but not a lot. I've been so busy with the Unity stuff until just very much recently.
I read a blog post today that they broke the team up into two separate teams, one for the asynchronous functionality, and another for the compiler as a service functionality. So I'm assuming those are going to be the two biggest sort of things that we're going to be seeing with it. Have you seen the asynchronous
Yeah,
stuff?
that's crazy cool.
Yeah, I love it. And the compiler as a service, I have really mixed feelings about it. Yeah, because I don't implement iView. Oh. Yeah, you see, this is what the designer generates for me, if you just get an idea about how terrible WinForms is. But that's not anything to do with my vendetta against designers. That just has to do with the fact that WinForms is ugly.
I wonder how he'd feel about Interface Builder over in the Mac world. It's interesting how when you lay out all of your objects, text boxes, labels, etc., and then they're saved out to a nib file that you're then going to load from your view controller, generally, they're actually freeze-dried objects. They're real objects. They're just basically pulled out of the nib file and put right on the heap. They're not a series of almost like instructions with what you saw there. They are objects as opposed to let's instantiate a new button. It's already a new button. It's just put on the heap and connected up based off of how your IB outlets and all are set up. It was very interesting the very first time I saw it.
Yeah, I don't know. I like WPF as far as GUIs go. It's my favorite one. Works really well. Okay, so we have that. This still takes that, but it shows us that. And then if we do list on 1, we can go ahead and show person 1. Or something like that, depending on what the command actually is. Show person, yeah. It's weird.
Now, I'll add just another hint, thought. Gut feeling is he won't like this. But you know what main could do? Main, you could say, what's your main window? It's going to be the display people view. And you have a people controller. I generally like having my views and controllers named the same when I'm following this practice. So you could have a display people view controller, and main could simply instantiate this controller. No, okay, Zach's eyebrows are
No, don't worry about my eyebrows.
of his nose. Sorry, so Zach, follow me. So from main, we instantiate this controller, and what this controller does is it launches its view.
Sure.
And tells the view about itself. So now you have your display people view,
Mm-hmm.
and you can go in with the designer and you can drop in buttons and all that good stuff, double click, have it auto generate code for you. Inside that form now, it has a reference to the controller. So now you can talk directly to its controller. If you hit the add button, now you can just call on its controller reference and call its add.
Sure.
Sending it any data that may have just been typed into
a right
text
line
fields
somewhere.
or something.
Yeah.
Huh. I don't know. I kind of feel like there needs to be something orchestrating it all. And the reason I feel like that is because passing in a controller to a view leaves kind of a bad taste in my mouth. I don't know. You know what I mean?
No, you're just making the connection. You're making the view aware of the controller, because in most standard definitions of pure MVC, the view is going to notify the controller when it was interacted with, so that the controller can then make decisions on how to go about calling upon model to change state or act upon its data.
Now, see, if we change the word controller to presenter, then I would have a different feeling about it, because that's sort of like with the MVP pattern.
But the funny thing is, though, the view and presenter. I mean, a view. I don't know. I mean, I'm just.
I have nothing I can add.
The whole world of Mac application development, working with Cocoa Touch. I mean, just they like to do everything around MVC patterns, and like if you have a root view controller that gets instantiated on your app when it gets launched up, and then the root view controller instantiates its UI view, and the UI view has all of its buttons on it and everything. But this view is being held in the controller, so right there, anything that is interacted with, the view knows about the controller. So it just simply tells the controller, hey, I was just interacted with, so that the controller can make decisions with its logic on how to go about what needs to be told to the model, so that the model can act upon that data accordingly. Model then acts upon the data accordingly, and then the view gets updated with what was just done. And it just, I mean, that seems like a very clean view of MVC. Your controller separated from your view, and your model is, sitting out over there, separated as well.
You see, what I think maybe a better way would be to pull up the members of the controller into an interface and pass that interface into a view.
Okay.
Because having a dependency on the concrete implementation of a component kind of creates a circular dependency. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. This is, again, I'm just going back to how you'll find common iPhone apps.
Right. And I'll go into how I make websites, so.
Understand.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, and by the way, the last time it wasn't showing up right is because it's show view and then enter, then one, not show view space one. Or not. Does it only work after I do... Oh, you know what? I think it does. Oh, it's not show view, it's show person. I can't type anymore. Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, maybe we could leave this up to the viewer to kind of make those, or figure out what a best way to be to complete this into a GUI. You know what I mean?
Okay, if you want. Zach,
It was all bonus content anyway.
But it's bonus content, and I like doing stuff like this. It's fun. It's fun.
Well, yeah, it is fun. This is something I would do on my free time. The problem is when I'm in this mode, I will quite frequently spend an hour doing it one way and then just delete everything and do it another way.
But this is design. That's what it's all about. We're designing.
Yeah, I know.
And right now, let's pretend Zach's watching you design a very basic Windows app, And now Zach's left with the idea of we've got to have a console popping up for Windows app. And when's the
That's been the only thing that has frustrated me. I mean, I don't even really mean frustrated in a really negative sense. It's been a little confusing because if the goal was to create a Windows app, why is the console coming up? Okay, fine. There are some apps where the console appears and then your window pops up. I've played with some of those. What's a really good example? Fcheck for Maya actually has a little Windows console that pops up in the background before Fcheck itself appears. Great, I can deal with that. But the fact that we've actually got to go type commands into the console in order to interact with our Windows form, that's weird.
Well, yeah. Well, from a UI design point, this is kind of like this is in the middle of a port to a
Right.
Windows GUI framework thing.
Nelson, did you not like my challenge? No, he didn't.
I don't think you liked your challenge at all.
I think it was clever, though. I was hoping he'd beat on it a little bit more. I mean, we're just hanging out. People can hit stop if
That's
they're
like-
bored, but
That's like make a fishing
See,
pole out of popsicle sticks and duct tape. You know, these are the only things you have.
Sometime in the future, we got to look at WPF and
oh,
MVVM.
absolutely. I completely agree. But
We can call it for now. That's fine.
oh man.
I'm sorry, Jason.
Well,
I'm terribly sorry.
what happens if you got the entire while loop out of there, but the contents of inside of the if statement for list was moved above that while loop? So you cut that stuff out.
So I cut this out.
When you do list right now, the result of if you type list, you
Okay.
you get the you instantiate a person controller list view, and then you call upon render. What happens if you cut those two lines and paste them up above? Yep, right there, and then get rid of the rest of it. Yeah,
Okay.
and run.
Yeah. Well, we got this.
So now you can get rid of the console in the background.
You know it's funny,
Yeah,
though.
but I know what this is leading up to. This is leading up to a controller reference in my view.
The whole thing has been like a MacGyver challenge. It's like, here are the only things that you have. Now make a program. And unfortunately, he's kind of, well, Nelson's turning into a MacGruber.
Otherwise, are you saying that there is no possible way that you could apply an MVC pattern to a WinForms app?
I don't believe there's a way that you can apply a strict MVC pattern to a Windows app or to a GUI application. And an example of that would be what happens when we add a new user. We have to re-render this view. Now, if we were using something like the model view presenter, the presenter would poke the view every time that the data changed.
But
Or
if you
we're
hit
using-
add and you got a new view, and you added
Right.
in the person, which updated the model, and the model updated the view.
Right, but then the model would have to know about the view.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see that as something I would want to do, because then we're coupling our model code to our view.
And I completely understand. I was just trying to look for a simple way for Zach to see controller with its data, view, which is just calling upon controller. And I know you had that. This just gets a little bit easier to see, but that's okay.
Right.
But so bottom line, Nelson says that you can't have a MVC pattern applied to a GUI application.
I say you can't have a pure MVC pattern applied. I'm saying that there are variants created for a reason.
So
to
Apple, so an iPhone app or an iPad app, those are
iOS app.
okay, an iOS app. Those are not GUI applications in most cases.
I'm not disagreeing with you that they're not GUI applications. I'm not disagreeing with you that they're not MVC applications. I'm disagreeing with you in that they're not pure MVC
You're thinking that
applications.
they are actually some variant of MVC.
Yeah.
Such as MVC.
And Apple will tell
or
you it is
VP.
MVC with all sorts of documentation on just
Yeah.
model view controller. No other definitions in all of their
But I mean,
documentation.
I don't see why it's something that we couldn't always come back to.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all good. I mean, this is, like I said, this is just extra time we're spending with our viewers and with you.
What's an exploration, and it's been interesting so far in that.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the challenge, Jason, but I just wish I was more comfortable with it.
So that's cool.
No,
That's
it's
cool.
no worries. Actually, it's still been very engaging in and of itself, just seeing the breakdown of going from your tiny little classic console app into something a bit more Windows oriented, and how you've broken apart all of your classes. That's been very interesting. And then hearing all of the dialogue and discussion over how each bit should start to try to adhere to the pattern. We can't say adhere to the pattern, apparently. How it tried to adhere to the pattern was great stuff. And what I'd like to see from here, of course, as we branch into future videos, is let's start exploring some of these variants, and then that'll give you the ground that you need in order to say, no, see, here's the way we should be doing it, here's the pattern we should be using, and then everybody will have a clearer image. So if anything at all, or if nothing else, I guess is another way to put it, we have at least laid out where we should go from here.
Yeah, I'm done with that. I mean, the big thing is at the end of the day, Zach, do you have an understanding of what the MVC pattern is?
I do. It's going to be the division of your code into one block that is going to handle the logic of your program, any data that it needs to store, the ability to work on and perform various functionality on that data, kind of a conglomerate of everything that your application really does at its core. Another block of your program is just there to display that, to present it to the user. And still there's a third block whose goal is to, it seems like at times act as an intermediary, but really it's about dealing with what the user tells the program to do and then firing off the necessary commands in order to make it all happen. Is that right?
Yeah.
Pretty close, yeah.
Well,
I mean,
how would pretty close go into completely...
Just by adding a little bit more detail, just by saying like the controller is going to then determine, instead of just firing off commands, it's going to determine how the model needs to be interacted with, so that the model can then process the request that just came in from the user. I'm just adding just a little bit. I'm not saying what you said was wrong. I didn't say it was wrong. I'm just adding a little bit more to it, just to tie all the words together. Because that's generally, at least from what I've worked with, that's generally how it's done. Then the model has the core application logic and is holding the data and updates it, and then if need be notifies the view, or the view can request updates in what's shown back to the user. And we probably have, with Nelson disagreeing slightly with how I see it, and there's probably a bunch of other people out there that disagree.
Probably.
But I can also pick up several very popular books and show you where almost word for word that's, how it's going to be described.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's all good. But go ahead, Nelson.
And I could be operating. I mean, I think it's called the front controller. If I'm not mistaken, and I've only I've heard this term used a few times in reference to web frameworks, but they usually reference something like a front controller pattern, which is another variant of MVC. So I could have been just talking about the variant that I spend most of my time in. But the point is that there's a bunch of different ways to organize it, and most importantly, although you always have pretty much a model, a controller, and a view, there's different ways to kind of allow them to communicate with each other.
Yeah.
I think that's where the variants come in, and they differ depending on if you're doing, iOS development, even Windows development, or web development.
And also, when you're dealing with simple apps, you're not going to always see a model, a view, and a controller. You can start seeing the model could be so simple that basically it's in the controller. So you have a controller and a view. At least once again, from GUI app development.
Yeah.
Or you could say that is your model, so you have a model and a view. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
But I'm just saying you don't have all three pieces always.
Right.
Especially with very simple applications. Large applications, it's a fantastic division in functionality, making your application very flexible. So, all right, Nelson, is there anything else you want to add in?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, awesome. Zach?
No, I've really, at this point, I'm just going to need to go back over everything that I've written down throughout this video.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like I have a solid understanding of the purpose of the MVC pattern and the general sense of how it is applied to solving the problem of whatever it is your code has to do.
Okay, and in this case, the problem that you're solving is how to make the application organization almost. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm trying to find a good way to describe it. Most flexible.
Yeah.
By breaking up these three key concepts, and then at that point, and Nelson did a good job in demonstrating that, where a few times he changed part of the system without having to touch any code from anywhere else. You know, changed the display from just console to suddenly we have a display that is a GUI display, and he didn't have to change anything in the application over in the controller or over in the model.
Right.
And that's very powerful and very important in my opinion. Okay, well, with that is going to wrap up this Nelson's Corner. Like always, Nelson, thank you very much for
Thanks,
your
Nelson.
time.
That was awesome.
And everyone else out there, thank you very much for joining us, and we will catch you with the next.
A big thanks to all our member sponsors. I just want to
Absolutely.
throw that out
Absolutely. And we'll catch everybody in the next Nelson's Corner with the next design pattern that we'll talk about. Thanks a lot, everybody.
there. Good night, folks.